Welcome to Chautauqua Books. My guest is Herb Smith. He is the proprietor of Clyde River Books in Westfield. He's had a life in books as a teacher at the university level, at high school level, and many years in the book business for B. Dalton's and Walden Books. Welcome, Herb. Let's start out with your background. You've had a life of books, as I say, and right now you're the proprietor of Clyde River Books. That started about 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about the kind of books you've got there. What's the content of your bookstore?
Well, it's really a full-line bookstore. I have a little bit of everything. A range of books from antiquarian, expensive, collectible books to books for a buck.
First editions and so on?
Some first editions, yeah. A real range of books from, yeah.
And what's the nature of the collection that you've done? I mean, is this essentially, you've decided these are many of your books, and of course the ones that you're accumulating as you are going on, or how did that work?
Well, a lot of the pleasure in selling old books is that you can buy the books you want to buy. Mm-hmm. Often I take them home and read them before I put them on the shelf.
You buy them new or you buy them used?
Well, I sometimes buy new books,
yeah.
but fewer and fewer.
Really? Fewer and fewer because it's just more expensive.
Yeah, I can't afford it anymore.
Yeah, right.
But I like old books.
Mm-hmm.
And,
do you find that that's the case? I mean, you worked at B. Dalton's for about 10 years.
I did,
right?
Yeah.
And Walden's for some years, too.
Mm-hmm. Three or four.
Yeah. I was going to introduce you, by the way, as a person who's your neighbor and perhaps a relative. I mean, you're from Mayville and this area. 13 years in the public school system here in Mayville, right?
That's right.
13 years. Now, what is that about, 13? Where's
13
the
years.
extra 13?
Oh, kindergarten and 1 through 12.
Kindergarten, okay.
Oh,
no
yeah.
kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, all in the same building.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Extraordinary. You know, my experience is so opposite of that. I mean, I don't even know what high schools practically I went to, let alone grade schools and junior high schools and kindergartens. And, you know, it's just, it's a world apart. Back to the bookstore, though. So you're specializing. I mean, I know that you're particularly interested in botany these days and so on, and hiking and wilderness sort of experience or outdoors. But what are you specializing there in the bookstore? Or is it special? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm strong in some areas and weak in other areas. I'm strong in natural history, country living, that kind of thing. Right. Also in literature, especially poetry. Ridiculously strong in poetry. I read poetry myself, and I've got, you know, pretty good selection over there, which I can read any time because I never sell them.
Now, your location, I mean, you're just right downtown in Westfield, but around the corner, and it must be tough to track the traffic going through. There's a lot of business in that. There's no way around that, though. The high cost of the real estate, comparatively.
I started out on Main Street. I was there for 8 months, and then I moved around the corner.
I see.
It was a deliberate choice. Probably not a real good business decision. It involved getting away from a bad landlord and getting a good landlord. So in that respect, it was a good move for me. But
did your business drop off or increase, or just?
Well, I wasn't there long enough to tell, really. It's hard to see patterns without being there longer than I've been there.
Yeah. So it's been about almost 2 years. I mean, it'll be 2 years in September.
Yeah, 2 years in September.
Yeah. If you were better known, if people know, I mean, the situation is that business requires advertising to get people in. But if you were better known, would you bring in more customers? Would there be more people? I mean, that's obviously some, but I mean, what I'm after is the reading public. Is it there for you?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I haven't been there long enough to really be sure of that. It's there. Whether enough of it is in, will actually come to my store in Westfield, that remains to be seen, really.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of that.
Right. I've noticed over the years that many people in used bookstore business, and certainly in the new business, new books, are not really readers. They know the value, economic value of a book, and they can tell you where it is, and they can tell you, you know, the various stages of its value, whether it's first edition, blah, 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 or covers and no covers, but they don't really know the content, and they're not particularly excited about the books. Is that your experience in B. Dalton's and many years in books business?
I wouldn't say that as a blanket thing. I know what you're talking about, and you do run into that a lot, especially in the chains, and I think it's getting more and more like that. People with a real book background don't want to participate in the kind of sales gimmicks that the chain stores use. Walden Books, for example, they sell these cards that you buy, like the supermarkets are into now.
Right.
It's real bogus bargain stuff. You have to pay them up front in order to get a bargain later on.
Right.
And the money you pay them, of course, goes right to their bottom line. And salespeople they're forced to sell those. If they have a quota, if they don't sell
right?
so many, they get written up.
Right.
And down the road they can get fired because they didn't sell enough of that stuff.
A particularly bad thing to get fired? I mean, I know everybody wants to be economically secure, but I mean, they're not paying much to those people, are they?
No, they aren't. No.
I mean, it's like you can get a job.
But getting back to your original comment, quite a lot of the people that I worked with in the chain stores were people who really liked books, and they wouldn't have been there for any other reason. They weren't getting much pay.
What's the process by which they get there? I mean, are many of them teachers like yourself who just get sort of flushed out of the system or self-flush out of the system?
Yeah, there's a certain number of those. Yeah, yeah, certainly. Yeah, teachers. When I was store manager for B. Dalton, I had an air traffic controller working for me part-time, several teachers working for me part-time. You get a real range, real mix of people. Yeah.
An ex-air traffic controller, one who'd been flushed out by the Reagan operation?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
And these were part-time because that's all there was?
That's right. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So it was a tough racket, I guess, huh?
It was, yeah. It's difficult. Yeah. Any work for the big national chains it's got to be demeaning in some way.
Right. Yeah. Back to the bookstore itself. One of the things that I've noticed is that often when you go in a bookstore and you're not really in tune with what's going on. Well, let me rephrase it. Often bookstores don't have a good collection of classics and a good collection of old stuff, but bookstores by their nature are books that have been bought and therefore sold, and many of us hang on to our best books, so therefore you don't have the best collection of books, because I wouldn't get rid of my best books. I wouldn't sell them. I'd sell my junk if I could get away with it, or you could throw it away or give it away, and so on and so on and so on. So you have some people who go in and are kind of like embarrassed, but they feel like they ought to buy something. How do you deal with that? And is that true?
To an extent, I guess it's probably true. Yeah, I think there's a fallacy in your argument there. You need to remember that one person's junk is somebody else's treasure.
That's true.
For one thing.
That's true.
Something that.
And a lot of people don't know the value of that particular book. They say, I can't understand it, I can't read it, I'll sell it. And it might be a particularly good book, and that happens. Yeah. And then, of course, estate sales must be, and there's a lot of just turnover there. So there's a lot of good stuff. But I'll bet you I could name 5 authors, and I know you wouldn't have any one of them. I don't want to knock the bookstore, though. Let's not do that.
Try me.
Yeah, right. No, because there, like you say, in areas that if you have an eclectic interest, you can find a lot of good stuff and a lot of stuff that you want to go back and re-examine. And that's what a used bookstore is about, in part, isn't it?
I had a phone call today from somebody up in the Adirondacks looking for a book on old New York State bridges, and I had it. Surprised me.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you know your inventory pretty well?
Oh yes. I've handled it all. I'm the only person who buys them, prices them, puts them out. So.
Yeah. Where do you get most of your books?
A lot of them just come through the door. Once you get a shop open, a lot of people want to sell you books. It's easier to buy books in Westfield than it is to sell them.
Yeah, right.
estate sales are a very good source of good books.
Library sales and things
Library
like that?
sales not so good, but yes, yeah, lots of books there. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
You have an MA in English and taught at the university level at SUNY in Oswego for a while, and 3 years or several years in high school, or 1 year in Jamestown. Before I would follow up a little bit on that teaching experience, you were in a PhD program too, I think. Is that true?
I was. I dropped out of a PhD program.
What were you looking at? What were you looking at doing?
Well, I wasn't looking at anything very intelligently at the time. I was young and confused.
I see. Yeah. So that's what happens to people.
Married. My wife was pregnant, and somebody had to work.
So this wasn't war years, sort of Vietnam War years. This was a little earlier.
It was a little earlier. Yeah.
So you had no thesis in mind in terms of PhD. It was just something along the lines of English. Yeah. Do you think that English as a subject prepares people as intellectual analysts, in a sense that Said does in his book, for example, his many books, Edward Said on imperialism, or the books on cultural comparative analysis? Do you think it does it, or it just sort of doesn't do a historic specificity with regard to the content? For example, if I'm not making any sense to you, it seems to me that often people read a thing and don't do a proper analysis of the context in which it was written and to whom it's really for and what the subtext is saying. Is your experience in English field, did it give you that sort of?
That's the kind of question that makes me glad I dropped out of a PhD program. I haven't read Said. If you're suggesting that English has traditionally been kind of a hideout for people who didn't do a lot of critical thinking, you're absolutely right. That's true. But so have a lot of other disciplines too.
Surely. That's the nature of the university.
Yeah, it is.
It seems to me that the university in those liberal arts areas, you have to unlearn and then relearn about double the time you spend in them in order to get an understanding of what the political economic system is all about. Of course, that's not pervasive and that's generalizing over much, because they're obviously really good teachers that you have along the lines, right?
Yeah, I was a graduate student at Syracuse University at the time when Syracuse was still a kind of a traditional school, and the main preoccupation of graduate students in English was just examining old texts and finding layers of meaning in them and discussing them.
So it was Empson and 7 Types of Ambiguity and that sort of stuff.
It was kind of a genteel tradition, and that was still, I was right at the end of that, really, I think.
Really?
It wasn't all that political at that time.
I see. Yeah. Huh. You're familiar with Empson and all that sort of, the ambiguity, questions, multiple meanings, and analysis and stuff, and not critical analysis in terms of, like Habermas and some of the people are doing today with literature.
Yeah, some of the stuff that's going on today in literary criticism is mind-boggling to me.
Mind-boggling in what way? Good or bad? Or just confusing?
It's just mystifying, really, to me.
I see.
Yeah.
Huh. Are there areas that you find particularly exciting that are going on in
I haven't kept up, frankly. My interest these days is more botanical, walking in the woods and finding unusual mushrooms, and that kind of thing.
I want to get back to mushrooms in just a minute, but first, White Rose Books. One of the bookstores you founded in Syracuse, I think, or co-founded, I guess. Founded or
founded?
Founded. Was White Rose. No?
Founded and then foundered.
Foundered, or did it go on at all?
No, it is still going on.
Oh, okay.
Actually, it's still there.
I see.
Yeah.
So, didn't founder?
No, didn't.
It's still called White Rose?
Still called White Rose.
Okay.
Now, it's prospering, actually,
really?
I think. Yeah.
Because it's got a university town, and that's...
It's near the university.
White Rose is a big contrast in terms of the name to Clyde River. Clyde River is a geographic place in Vermont, as you were telling me, upper northern Vermont. But White Rose is a political statement. Tell me about that.
Well, the Fellowship of the White Rose was I guess the closest that there was in Europe to a real counter movement against Hitler in Germany.
In Germany.
In Germany, yeah. It was wiped out completely and very effectively, but there's another angle to that name. There's a novel by B. Traven called The White Rose, with a similar kind of political implications. Setting is in Mexico, and it's an anti-corporation kind of novel.
Now, when you named it that, and that was your name, right?
It was.
That was clearly a political statement. Was it commenting more in homage to the White Rose group? And mostly they were young people, I think, if I recall.
They were, yeah.
Or was it a statement about contemporary America? Or both?
It was some of both, I'm sure. I wasn't that analytical about it at the time. I liked the name and I used it. I still like it.
Yeah.
Very few people who came in the store really understood the historic connection there.
One of the things that really intrigues me of late is the process of depoliticization that's gone on in this country, and it's a long, protracted process. Do you give much thought to that?
Well, process? I guess my going from the White Rose to Clyde River Books is sort of follows that pattern.
Right. Yeah.
My coming to Chautauqua County wasn't just a business decision. It was, it was partly a family thing. I grew up here, and I came back to my family. I have roots here and connections here, so that kind of skews the meaning of that, I think, a little bit for me.
Which skews the meaning? How do you mean?
Well, the depoliticizing thing. I guess probably. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure. You're throwing out a big idea there that I need a week to think about. I think
direct it to White Rose versus Clyde River. I'm talking about it in general across the United States, and I mean, books are one of the last refuges in this country where you have access to some ideas that are not commercially dominated. You have some public television, not television, radio, more. Television is almost, I mean, Garrison Keillor said, I can't really see the reason for public television anymore. I mean, basically what he's saying is that you're saying you can say things without the quick scrutiny, the close scrutiny of commercials, big business, corporate power, in public television any more freely than you can in commercial television. So books are one of the last sort of places in which you can get comprehensive ideas. It seems to me extremely important that bookstores exist, used bookstores exist. So it wasn't, I don't mean, it's not meant to contrast White Rose versus Clyde River only. Let's...
There was an interesting statistic in the paper sometime this winter. I can't quote it very precisely, but last year, for the first time in many years, there was an increase in the number of independent booksellers in this country. Slight increase. I don't know if that means anything 1 year, but it's an interesting counter-movement there.
It is, I mean, there are small niches being carved out for special interests, it seems to me. You see, I mean, you can see, I was in Toronto recently, and no, it was Montreal, and one major bookstore just went under. I mean, it's just the larger conglomerates are just pricing the smaller ones out of existence.
Was that the Smith chain?
Yeah, right. And also, of course...
That was a chain. The chains are devouring each other now.
Right, yeah. And some of the independent, relatively independent chains with, similarly with newspapers. I mean, you had a very conservative but an independent kind of perspective that was devoured in the last 30 years in this country. Bookstores. Bookstores, you know the community of bookstores. Are there some decent ones around this area? I mean, other colleagues in the business?
There are some good ones in the area. Yeah. Barbara Berry Books up the lake here has a really fine collection of books. The Erie Bookstore in Erie has a good collection of used books. There are a couple in Buffalo, at least 2 bookstores up there that are worth a visit.
Right. Anything comparable to Powell's with its lock on the remaindered market?
No, not probably comparable to Powell's, but
close?
Yeah, in that range. Well, I don't know. Powell's is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think more of used bookstores rather than remainder stores. Stores that specialize in remainders are really selling new books.
Really?
Discounted new books.
Right.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. I mean, Powell's is used, but like you say, it's really selling. But you can buy
most
half the price.
Bookstores, most used bookstores, do both. Eventually, if they're big enough.
Yeah. Yeah, university market is. How about Fredonia? I mean, you'd think there'd be it's a university
There
town.
There is an antiquarian bookstore in Fredonia now. It just recently opened. I haven't spent time there to comment on it really, but it looks like an interesting shop. Yeah.
Well, back to mushrooms. You're open essentially, let's see now, 3 days a week, right?
4 days.
4 days. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Right.
Okay.
12 to 5.
All right. How is it? Obviously, you're surviving on a minimum kind of money, and that's largely by choice, I assume to some degree, right? Well, I mean, you're spending a lot of time not hustling business Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but taking time off to hike and to botanize, I guess, right?
I probably shouldn't be saying this in public. A lot of people think that I'm out buying books on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Oh, you probably are, right.
I do a little bit of that.
Yeah, right. Buying books where? Estate sales and stuff? You don't want to give away to the competition,
right.
No. Sure, okay. Right. So are we getting a lot of good mushrooms over in the area?
So far, it's been a pretty good spring.
Yeah. Very wet.
Yeah, it's been wet at the right times, and
Yeah.
it stays cool. This is morel weather.
I see. And do you know your mushrooms pretty well?
I'm fairly
Enough to
knowledgeable
keep
about
from
them.
getting poisoned.
Oh yeah.
Right. Are a lot of people doing mushrooms? What's the value of mushroom? I don't like mushrooms at all. I mean, but I mean, in terms of the vitamin, the minerals.
Oh, it's kind of minimal, I think.
Minimal?
Yeah.
You just have to like the taste.
You read a variety of opinions on it.
Yeah.
Some people say that there are a lot of micronutrients in them, but I don't know. I haven't seen them.
Really? Well, what do you like about them then? Taste?
Oh, it's more going out looking for them, I think, than finding them.
It's the hunt.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. But many of them are very good. I mean, they're delicious. They're wonderful eating.
Yeah.
But the real interest is in finding them and identifying them. It's a fairly difficult kind of botanical discipline.
Really. Are there wildflowers and so forth and that particularly interest you? And you've been observing the kind of environment for many years. I mean, have you seen any substantive changes in terms of degradation or species reduction or what?
Well, Chautauqua County, there's a lot of environmental, there's some environmental change going on. I see a lot of very destructive logging going on.
It's pretty much clear-cut stuff. There's not much planning.
A lot of that, yeah. The county's overrun with white-tailed deer, and they're terribly destructive of wild plants, especially in places where things like wild orchids grow and swamps and that kind of thing. They're just overrun with deer in the county. Do
you have any recommendations on how to deal with that problem? I mean, the problem is one of shrinking environment, ecosystems, essentially.
That's a really complex problem, a difficult problem. The coyotes are back, and I think they're probably helping a little bit.
But the deer seasons is not long enough. Does it dissolve the problem? Or what? I mean, it's only one small solution to it.
Yeah, that has not solved the problem. It doesn't work. they kill the wrong deer and not enough of them. And
I see. Because they're smaller, the ones that are...
you know, they're smaller and smaller. It's more a problem of habitat, I think, than of hunting. I don't think that that's a solution in that direction. I don't know.
How about the Nature Conservancy? They're pretty active over in the Mina area, where I think you're located, right?
Well,
are you involved with them? Or
I'm not involved with them now. I once was a member of the Nature Conservancy. Yeah, it's a very good group, I think. Yeah, yeah. They have the only public land in the town of French Creek is that little nature preserve that they have there. Yeah, which is a wonderful spot to hike.
Yeah. So, get back to books, and away from mushrooms just a second, and deer and so on. And that is authors. You know, it's a kind of a trivial question, but maybe not. Favorite authors? Favorite people that you say, you know, I think a politicized person, in a sense, would say, you've got to read this. This is important for your, you know, I like it, what do you think, or whatever reason. Do you find you're yourself doing that with books or not?
I find myself doing that, but not usually until I get to know a person.
Sure.
I do it in terms of the person as I get to know them, you know, suggesting that they should read this. And,
well, give me 2 or 3 books that you've recommended to people that you know well enough to say that you should read this. What books?
Well, let's see. What have I recommended lately? I should have prepared for that question.
Jeez, no, it's okay. Let me rephrase it here. What authors right now do you think are crucial? You know, what contemporary writers do you think this guy or woman has got something that we need to hear?
Well, I've moved back to the country, and I'm looking at things from kind of a pastoral point of view. And I'm reading things like Wendell Berry and Gary Snyder and some old stuff like that.
Yeah, Gary Snyder still. So they're both writing today, of course.
Yeah, Wendell Berry was here at Chautauqua last summer.
Really? Did you go?
I missed him. Yeah. My reading is very hit and miss. I go in this direction and this direction. I've been reading Bruce Chatwin lately, not for any really good reason.
Interesting guy, isn't he?
Wonderful writer.
What he's got? About 5 books before he died at a relatively
5 books,
young age.
Somebody put together a 6th one, I think, after he died.
Really? Yeah, extraordinary look at culture. Let's see. There was something I wanted to ask. Oh yeah, Thoreau. You've read, undoubtedly, lots of Thoreau.
I've read quite a lot of Thoreau.
Yeah. The Thoreau that interests me of late is the political Thoreau, the Thoreau of civil disobedience, and the Thoreau of the politicized Thoreau. Have you given much thought to that Thoreau?
That's interesting. That's where I started with Thoreau years ago when I was a graduate student, and I guess I've got to the other end of Thoreau. What I'm finding interesting in Thoreau is his journals, his walking in the woods and his minute observations of natural history. His writing in that area.
The bulk of that not published until his death.
Right.
Of course.
Yeah.
But Walden is a very political book. It seems to me.
It is, really.
In addition to the poetry of the book.
I read a book this winter about Emerson. A book called Emerson Among the Eccentrics. Quite a lot of it's about Thoreau. It's about the whole group of people that surrounded Emerson and Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller and Hawthorne and Bronson Alcott and all of that group in Concord. Fascinating book.
Really? The name of it again is what?
Emerson Among the Eccentrics.
Right.
It was more about Emerson, of course, than Thoreau, but Thoreau was quite important in the book.
I was thinking that there's a big contrast between, say, Muir, John Muir, yeah, and Thoreau, and that...
Edwin Muir happens to be one of my favorite poets.
Yeah, right, different Muir. In that one could have met with Theodore Roosevelt, could have helped establish national parks, could have been the activist, whereas Thoreau could never have been. But he was a quiet, viscerally political person, you know, in the context of Concord and so forth. Of course, he's a guy that actually was one of the mentors of the New Left and the anti-Vietnam movement. Well,
he was much of the inspiration for Gandhi. He was one of
surely.
Gandhi's mentors, certainly.
How about young people today? Are you in touch, in tune with what they're reading mostly? You know?
No, I can't say that I really am. I don't think. No. The ones that come in my store, which aren't very many, by the way, they're looking for the beats, pretty much.
Really?
Yeah, and I have almost nothing.
Why?
Not because I don't want it, because it's hard to find.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
And who
beats
in
are.
particular are they looking for? Kerouac?
Kerouac is the one they mention first, usually. Yeah.
Huh. That's because there's more contemporary writing on Kerouac.
I think so. Yeah.
Huh. Is an era that you found interesting? I mean, the Beat generation?
Somewhat. I read them. I like Ginsberg. I like Ginsberg's poetry a lot. I think he's underrated as a poet.
Just picked up a couple of books from you, bought them from you a couple days ago. Marge Percy and Adrian Rich. Some extraordinary, I mean, Percy's not known as a poet, I guess, so much, at least I don't know her as a poet, but as a novelist. But Rich, both of them are extraordinary poets, seems to me. A lot of, any particular poets contemporaries?
Well,
you mentioned Snyder. That you're particularly interested in?
Well, I mentioned Wendell Berry.
Berry. He's a poet as well, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a poet.
He's also, isn't he, a monk?
No, you're thinking, who are you thinking of? Thomas Merton, perhaps?
No, there's another Berry.
Oh, is there a Berry who's a monk? I don't know.
There is.
Oh, you lost me on that one. Wendell Berry's a farmer in Kentucky. And a wonderful poet. Yeah.
In terms of publicizing Clyde River books, have you entertained things like poetry readings and having guests sign books and so forth?
I've thought about it, and I've talked about it, and so far I have not really done it. I'm open to that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to. I did a little bit of that sort of thing in Syracuse.
Right.
Yeah.
It really does work. I mean, it gets people, to look at stuff. Do you find yourself buying stuff that you hate because it'll sell?
Not very much. Sometimes I get it by accident. I occasionally buy, boxes full of books.
I see.
Sometimes I'm not sure of everything that's in it when I buy it. You take
so
a
you
chance.
just throw it out, or you mark it down, or how do you deal with it?
There are a lot of things you can do with it.
Yeah, right.
I don't very often throw it out. I sometimes donate them. Oh
Yeah.
To get rid of something. I mean, if I really gotta. Yeah, if I happen to find 6 William Buckley books, I'd probably donate them to the Salvation Army, get rid of them.
Yeah,
just
is that a good
I
thing?
want to have them in the same room with me.
Right.
But
I throw them out. Trash them. Book burning. Not really. You have, I notice, a science fiction section. There's an interesting bunch of politics in science fiction. I was just reading something I probably bought from you or the library here in Mayville, and that was P.K. Dick. Extraordinary, there are political writers among the science fiction writers. Is that a genre that has interested you, or do you find many people buying those books?
I've never got into science fiction myself. I did quite well with science fiction in Syracuse, in the university section. And when my son was growing up, he was a science fiction fan. He collected Michael Moorcock, and I know it had a real influence on him. He was a real creative, imaginative kind of kid, and Moorcock just turned him on.
Really?
I know there's a lot of really good writing in that area, but it's not something I really got into myself.
You taught in Prince Rupert Island, I think, right?
Prince Edward Island.
Yeah, Prince Edward. Rupert is BC. That's not an island. What was it like in contrast to teaching in the U.S., Oswego?
Oh, that was years and years ago.
Yeah.
Roy,
too far back.
Probably too far back.
Yeah. Well, the thing that strikes me as interesting is listening to CBC radio and contrasting it to NPR as we were talking about it, and hearing the incredible articulate quality of the boys and girls, the young people, and particularly the girls. Although it may be that if you pointed a mic at many people in this country and gave them the same opportunity to talk, you wouldn't find it as depressing as I think it might be. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you on both of those. I think that Canadians, especially young Canadians, are fascinating people, intelligent, articulate, and often well-educated. But an awfully lot of kids in this country are too.
It's surprising, the kind of resilience that exists in this country, given the cultural onslaught and commercialism
that's right.
that exists.
Yeah.
I mean, Jamestown, for example, has no public access television. You know, there's nothing.
That's criminal.
It really is.
That really is.
And there's virtually, you know, the radio is commercial, and there's no outlet for, and there's one newspaper that controls pretty much what data comes through.
Pretty much the same newspaper that the rest of the county has too now.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's surprising that there's some real critical thinking going on among young. Of course, there's a lot of factors.
There always is. You can't keep kids from learning and from being creative. And the public schools have tried for a long time.
If you were attempting to provide a kind of access to books that they were reading, how would you go about that, or would you?
I don't. I'd start by asking them, I think.
Yeah.
I'm kind of out of touch there.
Yeah. Is that a sort of an orientation that you want? I mean, what do you want out of what you're doing now? What is your optimal goal at the bookstore, Clyde River Books?
You know, I'd like to get down to 3 days a week, so I'd have more time to hike.
Sounds good. So minimal.
I'd like to get a partner so that I wouldn't have to do some of the bookkeeping stuff, which I'm not very good at.
This is kind of a really trivial question, but coffee is a big thing in bookstores, as you well know. Is that something you're totally averse to?
I'm really out of touch on that because I'm a tea drinker.
Oh, yeah? Well, you know, tea's possible.
That's true. I would like to do that. I'd like to have a little corner with coffee and tea, and I'm actually in the early stages of negotiating something like that. So that could happen down the road.
It's extraordinary. I mean, a lot of people would go a couple of miles out of the way for a good cup of coffee. You know? I mean, when they see a sign saying coffee, they might go for it before books, and then, you know, who knows? You know?
Who knows?
I mean, if it's espresso or whatever else.
There should be a niche in Westfield. We just lost a nice little locally owned deli there, which was put out of business by one of the ugly plastic chains.
It's extraordinary. I heard some kids talking about the ugly plastic chain, and they said, "Oh, we're big time now. We're going to get a ugly plastic chain," and they were really exulting in this fact that was a major breakthrough for the town of Westfield. So it's a struggle, eh?
Well, yes, it is. It's it is. Certainly, a lot of people in Westfield, that's what they want. They want Westfield to look just like every other strip town in the country. You know, when that happens, there won't be any reason for anybody to come to Westfield and shop because they can stay home and do it because all the same stores will be there.
So, what has been your experience with internet? I mean, internet's taking a big chunk out of small business. And the big business is going to dominate the stuff, and it's especially happening in books, in the area of books. You know, you can, B. Dalton's has got their site, and they're competitive with Amazon and you know, every big bookseller has got it. What's the going to happen with this sort of thing, do you think? With bookstores, small bookstores in particular? I
don't know. Whenever there's a big trend like that, it's everybody's talking about. There's almost always down the road a little way. There's going to be a counter trend, something you know, It's going to happen, something different. There's going to be a niche for bookstores. An awfully lot of people don't want to buy a book without picking it up and looking at it. I don't. I buy occasionally, mail order, or from the internet. You know, I have access through, and I get books for people that way. But
well, one thing
for myself, I want to pick up the book and see it. I want to know what I'm getting.
If I get a good review of it or read it in the New York Times or wherever else, I'll buy it in a flash from Amazon. But the thing is that often, because there's more book buying going on, there's going to be a lot more used books, I suspect, and that should be at least some positive thing for the used bookstore market, especially in a town like, in an area like Jamestown. I mean, there are probably, I don't know, 75, 100,000 people in the whole sort of area of Chautauqua County, and there's really not one good new bookstore, is there? Or is there?
Actually, there are two fairly good new bookstores. There's the Walden Books down at Chautauqua Mall.
That's
not a
like,
very big store. It's a chain
like
store.
the gift trade, though.
Yeah, it is. But they order books for you.
Sure.
You can,
yeah, you
and
can order them yourself
there's
and
a
get
store
25%.
in Dunkirk, Fredonia, at the mall there. It's a nice little store, and they order books too. There, you know, they can get them for you very quickly.
Listen, compare it to bookstores in Toronto. I mean, I know it's a big city, but you know, you walk in and the world's largest bookstore for, you know, I don't know how many millions of volumes, where you can get the collected works of Henry Giraud on pedagogy and X, Y, and Z. I mean, you know, it's pretty thin, don't you think? Well, it's obviously pretty thin. Yeah. So back to this thing. Have you given it some thought? If you were going to tell people about one contemporary author, would you say Barry and Snyder? Snyder of the...
Oh, I probably could do better than that if I had some time to think about it. Contemporary authors. I don't read very many contemporary authors.
That's why you're in the used bookstore business.
Yeah, I read. Unusual for me to read a book that's not at least 100 years old. I think.
Wow, that's a real filtering out process.
Gilbert White, Natural History of Selborne. Everybody's heard about him now because of the Selborne projects that they're doing in the schools around here. Still a wonderful writer.
Yeah. So some of you're saying Selborne, some of the others in natural history that are particularly impressed you. Are there sorts of books that you could recommend in natural history?
Well, I have quite an extensive section, and I kind of browse people through it. I like the classic stuff, British stuff, Richard Jefferies, W.H. Hudson, that kind of thing. And Thoreau, of course. I have a lot of Thoreau, and you can get people to actually read Thoreau.
I imagine, to some large extent, the women's movement really added to interest in the transcendentalists with Fuller and you know, the women who were sort of associated or partially associated with the transcendentalist movement, particularly Fuller. But she was on the sort of the early stages of the feminist movement, you know. For her untimely death, you know, it was an extraordinary story, the life of Margaret Fuller. You know, Buckminster Fuller is related to...
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, it never had occurred to me.
Really the case.
That's curious.
He goes way back in
Yeah.
the transcendentalist movement.
Wow.
Let's see. It's a whole bunch of stuff that I wanted to ask you. But one of the things, you taught, I think, some languages, or you did
I taught some French and some Latin.
I see. Taught them in high school, or where?
In high school, yeah. I'm certified in secondary French. Taught quite a lot of Latin. I always enjoyed teaching Latin.
Huh. That's extraordinary. I had a couple of years of Latin. Latin didn't pan out too well in the last 30 years, did it?
No, you hear people keep talking about Latin's going to make a big comeback, and they're teaching it more. But I don't. I don't see much of that. I don't know. I'm kind of out of touch.
I think we're down to, languages are down to accents. You know, I was listening to a Kenyan talk and thinking, this is an accent. His talk is an accent. His language will disappear. You know, if at the rate we're going, Kikuyu or Swahili or Bantu, rather, are disappearing. You know, in a large sense. As a world historic, certainly languages, to the degree that they ever were. But there's not much good reason, from a standpoint of the commercial globalism, to have Latin anymore, is there? I mean, we're talking economics here, we're not talking anything else, mostly.
I don't know. That kind of argument, if I accepted it, I'd have to accept it for a lot of other languages too, and you know, I think they're all worth keeping. I think they had some value at one time. And, you know, they're part of the history of the species, and I don't think I've been struggling in recent years to try to learn a little bit of Welsh because I want to read some old Welsh poetry. That's an astonishing language to try to learn. You have
Dylan Thomas ever do any stuff in Welsh at all?
I don't think so. I don't think he was fluent in Welsh. He grew up in South Wales, and was his first language was really English. He could probably understand.
His father, after all, was an English teacher. Yeah. I mean, you know, so.
Welsh is making a comeback in Wales. They have a television station there, which is all Welsh, and they're teaching it in the elementary school. So, I was in Wales 6 years ago, just briefly, and it was amazing. Little kids in the street talk to each other in Welsh. That's in North Wales, up, you know, when you get away from England.
Found it a particularly poetic language?
Oh, I don't know.
Did you?
Probably not more so than any other language. I don't know.
Really?
I mean, it's a language that has an enormous history, you know, literary history. They claim to have the oldest continuous, you know, literary history of any language in the world. It goes way back.
Right. So, a question about the language. Would you advise, if there was an option today, a person not to take German or French or Russian or Japanese or Chinese and take Latin?
Oh, I don't.
Or do you give much thought to that thing?
I don't, frankly, give much thought to that thing. Why not take them both?
Yeah. Right. Okay. It's tough going, Japanese and Latin at the same time.
Yeah, I guess it would be. But it's quite possible. I can remember a conversation with a graduate student from India who said that he had learned something like 5 languages before he came to this country, and they all had a different script, and they were all, it's possible.
Sure. It's kind of hard when the whole world is sliding into English as the first language when you go to a city and most everybody will speak English and prefer to do it to you. So, excuse me, kicking you here. Back to the bookstore. You're pretty much actually actively looking for a partner, or what? Or just that's just sort of a back of the thought that you.
It's a thought that I have in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely a need. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, running a business solo is difficult. There's a lot to it. You know, there are a lot of things about it that I don't have much interest in that are actually quite important.
Well, Barbara Berry's is doing it incredibly well. Part of the thing is its location. It's got a really good, lots of traffic going back and forth. And also, I'm sure there's multiple persons involved there. that sort of direction is not particularly appealing to you. I see.
Not really, no, not at this
He's
point.
doing a lot of internet
Yeah.
stuff and
No,
searches and
No,
yeah.
no. No, I think there's, you know, for me, I'd like to keep the scale small.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like the size of my store about the way it is now. You know, there are some areas I'd like to expand, but not, you know, a real big expansion of the store as a whole doesn't really appeal to me.
The pricing of books. Often when you bring in a book, you think, well, it's worth quite a bit more. But there's not really much of a markup. I mean, there's just barely enough to survive markup in used books for the most part. What's your experience in that?
Well, if you're talking about average,
Yeah.
that's probably true. There's always the, you know, the one book at the bottom of the box that nobody knew was there that turns out to be worth $500. You know, that does happen occasionally.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you do with a
Well,
book
more
like
likely
that?
$50.
Right, okay, 50, 75.
Yeah.
What do you do with a book like that? You find a buyer for it sometimes?
Sometimes you find a buyer for it. Sometimes you know a buyer immediately. Sometimes if you need to pay the rent, you wholesale it out to somebody that you know will know a buyer for it.
I see.
Yeah.
Things
There's
like,
quite a lot of that kind of networking among booksellers.
okay. The Internet's doing quite a bit of that too. I mean,
Yeah.
Amazon, for example. But it seems to me that some of the books that I order, back order, say a book that I can't find anywhere, I get it extremely cheaply. I mean, just extraordinarily cheaply, given the rarity of the book. I don't know how that's done.
Well, often the rarity of a book is just an appearance, you know. I mean,
Yeah, it's a subjective
you've only
factor.
seen one copy of it in your life anywhere, and
Yeah.
so it's a very rare book.
And it's
But
not really.
maybe, you know, yeah, right, in California, maybe every bookstore's got three
Yeah.
copies, you know, underneath. It's
Right. Yeah.
a distribution problem.
Yeah. The bookstore that preceded you there on Main Street, what happened to that one?
He closed, and shortly after that he died. He was not well. I didn't know him very well.
You taught it?
He taught at Fredonia.
I see. You getting much spillover from students and faculty at Fredonia into the
Not
bookstore?
much, no.
How
And
do you
I've
kind
talked to people who had bookstores in Fredonia, and they said the same thing.
Really?
Yeah.
No idea why, huh? I mean, you know, I lived in Chicago for some years, and University of Chicago was there, Northwestern University was there, DePaul, several other major universities. But the university that was most intellectually active and alive, fervently, was the sort of comparative, the city college sort of thing. It was just young and dynamic and aggressive, and those are the people who were buying books and talking. And the big universities were just insular, comparatively. But what's going on in Fredonia?
I don't know. Insular is probably a good word for it. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that.
Well, that bookstore on the campus is kind of like a joke.
Yeah, it's not a bookstore really. It's a souvenir store. But that's true of almost any college bookstore these days.
Really? No kidding. I just got back from Montreal, and I thought their bookstores up there were pretty good.
Yeah, Montreal's a good book town.
Yeah. And also, Toronto is not bad either.
Toronto's not bad. Ottawa's a wonderful book town.
Really?
You know, used bookstores. Yeah,
So
traditional.
you give some thought. We're just about out of time, so we'll let you off the hook finally here. But you give some time. We spent some time in Canada. You're obviously finding much better access to media. You know, books and so particularly. But a thing that we talked about briefly was the kind of literacy or seeming literacy or political astuteness or analysis or whatever, critical abilities of many of the students. And part of that is a function of CBC, you know?
Yeah, you're
CBC
absolutely right.
was established in the 30s and to be public, and it almost maintained it until today.
Yeah, we don't have anything comparable to that in this country,
Yeah.
really, do we?
Right.
or the National Film Board of Canada. Or,
Right, absolutely. It's just gone. The whole concept of public affairs media is almost down the toilet, it seems to me. So we got to do something about that. Clyde River Books is signed up to do something about that.
all right.
Okay, good. Well, Herb, thanks for enduring this, and thanks for being the guest on Chautauqua Books.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
And thank you for watching Chautauqua Books. I'm Roy Harvey.